My name is Sarah. I'm 32.
Pick it up, Sarah. You are done here. I built this place, David. You answered phones. No, I kept you all standing. He does not owe you a performance.
2 weeks ago, I stood in the pristine marble lobby of my husband's cosmetic surgery clinic, holding a cardboard box filled with my desk belongings. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, had just tossed it at my feet. "David is filing for divorce," she announced, her voice carrying easily over the soft waiting room music. "A high-end surgeon needs a wife with class, Sarah, not a glorified receptionist." I stood there in the navy blue scrubs I had worn for 5 years. I watched my husband, David, standing 3 feet behind her, looking down at his expensive leather loafers. No guilt, no hesitation, just a man letting his mother do his dirty work so he could clear the path for the 4-year-old aesthetician standing nervously by the reception desk. I had built that clinic. Every spreadsheet, every billing system, every late-night payroll run. My name wasn't on the frosted glass door, but my fingerprints were on every single dollar that funded their luxury cars and country club memberships. I had worked 6 zero-hour weeks for years and never thought twice about it, because I thought we were building a life together. 30 minutes before Eleanor threw that box, she had called me into the back office to inform me I was being replaced. And what I did next, she didn't expect. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to last October, the month David decided to expand the practice. It was a Thursday evening in our kitchen, rain tapping against the large bay windows of our Scottsdale home. My phone buzzed with an email alert, another unpaid vendor invoice, while I was reheating dinner for the 3rd time. David walked in, untying his silk tie, his face glowing with a kind of manic energy. "We're opening a 2nd location," he announced, leaning against the Marble Island, a full medical spa in Paradise Valley. I felt a sudden heavy knot pull tight in my stomach. "David, we can't afford that right now. The primary clinic's overhead is already stretching our margins, and insurance reimbursements have been delayed for months. Don't worry about the margins, Sarah. That's why I brought my mother in to handle the new expansion." Eleanor wasn't a businesswoman. She was a socialite who spent her afternoons at charity luncheons and her evenings criticizing my wardrobe, but David worshipped her. To him, Eleanor represented the high society image he so desperately wanted to belong to. To her, I was just the small-town girl who managed the books because she was too cheap to hire a real accounting firm. "Sarah," David said, his tone shifting into that condescending, overly patient voice he reserved for patients asking too many questions. "You just focus on answering the phones and keeping the schedule straight. Mom and I will handle the big picture." He disappeared into the master bedroom. I listened to the shower turn on, and I made a note on my legal pad to move $3,000 from our personal savings to cover the clinic's payroll. Again, that was the first time I realized how hard my husband was trying to keep me away from the actual finances. I should have paid more attention. 3 weeks later, Eleanor officially moved into the clinic, not to work, but to occupy space. She took over the large corner office, redecorated it with imported Italian leather chairs, and started intercepting the mail. On a Wednesday afternoon, while I was dealing with a backlog of patient files, Eleanor walked up to the reception desk. "Sarah, I need you to sign these authorization forms," she said, sliding a thick stack of papers across the counter. "What are they?" "Just standard insurance submissions for the new laser treatments." She waved her hand dismissively. David already reviewed them. "The billing company needs a secondary signature, and since you handle the front desk, it makes sense for it to be you. You'd be doing David a huge favor." I looked at the forms. The numbers were staggering. "Eleanor, these are level 5 billing codes. We don't even have the equipment for these specific procedures yet." "It's not your job to question the medical codes, Sarah," she sighed, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. "It's just paperwork. We'll handle the actual operations. I promise it's all sorted." I had heard that promise before. When I was 26, I co-signed a business loan to get David's practice off the ground. Took me 4 years of extreme budgeting to pay it off, while he bought a Porsche. When I was 29, I cashed out my modest retirement fund to cover a malpractice settlement he wanted, kept quiet. But this was my husband's clinic, and I was the wife. The one with the organizational skills, the quiet patience, the willingness to stay in the shadows. Fine, I said. Leave them here. I told myself this was what a supportive partner does, but I didn't sign them. Not that day, not the next. Over the next 3 months, the Paradise Valley expansion took shape, and I watched it happen from the outside. Eleanor created a group chat with the new aesthetic nurses. I wasn't added. I found out about the grand opening gala when a catering company called the front desk to confirm a $12,000 champagne fountain order. I called David twice to ask about the budget for the gala, whether we should scale back the spending. The first time he said he'd look into it. The second time, he let it go to voicemail and texted an hour later. Super busy. Mom has the budget handled. Talk soon. I never received a formal invitation to the gala. Not a printed one, not a digital one. But I told myself that was normal. I was the wife. You don't send the owner's wife an invitation. She's automatically included. Then, 2 weeks before the grand opening, one of the new nurses, Chloe, the 24-year-old, with perfectly filled lips and zero medical background, posted a photo on Instagram. A private dinner at an upscale steakhouse. Chloe sitting next to David. Eleanor beaming beside them. The caption read, "Celebrating the new clinic with the dream team. Number family." I stared at that photo for 11 minutes. I counted. I wasn't in it. I hadn't been invited to the dinner. I almost called. Almost asked why my husband was buying $300 steaks for a new hire while I was at home eating cold pasta and reconciling his bank statements. But I talked myself out of it. Maybe it was just an impromptu staff thing. Maybe I was overthinking it. I closed Instagram and opened the clinic's secure server. I pulled up the authorization forms Eleanor had tried to get me to sign weeks ago. I hadn't just filed them away. For the past 5 years, Eleanor and David had introduced me to everyone as the girl who answers the phones. They treated me like a glorified secretary because it made them feel superior. What they completely forgot, or perhaps never bothered to learn when we first met, was that before I married David, I didn't just study business. I spent 4 years working for the State Department of Health. I am a certified medical auditor, and as I sat alone in the dark office, reading through the billing codes my husband had been quietly submitting for the past 6 months, the math finally started to make sense. I sat in the blue glow of the clinic's computer monitor until 3 a.m. The building was dead quiet. In medical billing, Level 5 codes are reserved for severe, highly complex procedures. Reconstructive work. Multiple hours under general anesthesia. Extensive post-operative care. David was billing Level 5 codes for routine, 1 5-minute Botox injections. He was billing for comprehensive laser resurfacing on patients who had only come in for a free 10-minute consultation. Worse, he was creating phantom patients using the names and insurance information of people who had called to ask about pricing but had never actually stepped foot in our clinic. I exported the data. 201 records. 412 records. By 4 a.m., the spreadsheet had 850 fraudulent claims. Total stolen from federal and private insurance providers over 18 months. $2.4 million. My name wasn't on the clinic door. It wasn't on the glossy brochures Eleanor handed out at her charity lunches. But as the wife who officially managed the front office, my name would absolutely be on the federal subpoena when this house of cards collapsed. But the fraud wasn't the thing that broke me. The fraud was just math. At 4:30 a.m., I opened the corporate American Express statement. Eleanor had told me David needed a new card for executive expenses related to the expansion. I had authorized the issue. I scrolled past the medical supply orders and the catered lunches. November 12. The Four Seasons Resort, Sedona. $1,200. November 14. Tiffany & Co. $3,400. Categorized as client appreciation. I cross-referenced the dates with the clinic schedule. November 12 was the weekend David told me he was attending a mandatory surgical seminar in Phoenix. It was also the exact same weekend Chloe, the new aesthetician, posted a photo of a resort pool with the caption, "Weekend Getaway." I didn't scream. I didn't throw my coffee mug at the wall. I just sat there, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. $3,400 for a necklace for a 4-year-old. The week before, I had canceled my own dental appointment because David told me cash flow was too tight for unnecessary expenses. I drove home at 5 a.m. The streets of Scottsdale were empty and dark. When David walked into the kitchen at 7 a.m., he looked exactly like the man I had married. Handsome, confident, perfectly put together in his tailored suit. "You're up early," he said, pouring a cup of coffee. "I was working on the books," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat. "David, the American Express bill came in. There's a $3,400 charge from Tiffany's." He didn't flinch. He didn't drop his mug. He just smiled. That practiced, reassuring doctor's smile he used to calm nervous patients. "Oh, right. Mom wanted to get a nice gift for our top referring physician. It's an investment, Sarah. You know how networking goes." "Right. Is there a problem?" he asked. His voice dropped a fraction of an inch, taking on that warning edge. The edge that meant don't question me. "No problem," I said. "I'll categorize it as marketing." I watched him drink his coffee. For 5 years, I had been the shock absorber for this family. I took the late nights, the stress, the endless condescension from his mother. I took it because I believed I was part of a team. I believed my sacrifices were building our future. But standing in that kitchen, I realized I was never a partner. I was a human shield. If the new clinic succeeded, it would be a testament to David's brilliance and Eleanor's high society connections. But if the federal authorities knocked on the door asking about $2.4 million in fraudulent billing, it would be the glorified receptionist who handled the paperwork taking the fall. They were setting me up to go to prison for them. I went to work that day. I smiled at the patients. I fetched Eleanor her sparkling water when she snapped her fingers at the front desk. And over the next 5 days, I systematically copied every server drive, every forged authorization form, every phantom patient file, every American Express statement. I didn't print them at the clinic. I exported them to an encrypted hard drive. It took 400 pages to document the exact anatomy of their lies. I drafted a cover letter to the Office of the Inspector General and the Arizona Medical Board. Enclosed is evidence of systematic medical billing fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft committed by Dr. David Vance and Eleanor Vance. I didn't write it out of spite. I didn't write it out of jealousy over a 4-year-old aesthetician. I wrote it because $2.4 million and a federal indictment was a weight I refused to carry for a family that didn't even want me at their dinner table. I mailed the package on a Tuesday morning. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. 3 days later, the trap snapped shut. Not at the clinic, but at the grand opening gala of the Paradise Valley location. The party I wasn't invited to. It had been exactly 14 days since Eleanor threw my cardboard box onto the marble floor. 14 days since David stood silently while his mother announced my divorce to a waiting room full of patients. For 2 weeks, I hadn't received a single phone call from my husband. No apology, no explanation. Just an automated email from his attorney containing a lowball settlement offer and a formal demand to vacate our Scottsdale home by the end of the month. They thought I was at home, packing. They thought I was sitting on the floor of our guest bedroom, crying over a marriage that had been a lie. But on Friday evening at 7 p.m., I was sitting in my 4-year-old Honda Civic in the parking lot of their grand opening gala. I watched the valet park David's brand new Porsche. I watched wealthy investors, local politicians, and pharmaceutical reps step out of luxury SUVs, walking up the red carpet that had been rolled out over the pristine concrete. I checked my watch. 7:15 p.m. I stepped out of the car. I didn't wear a revenge dress. I didn't spend 3 hours doing my hair. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer and sensible heels, the exact kind of outfit you wear to a federal deposition. Inside, the Paradise Valley Clinic didn't look like a medical facility. It looked like a nightclub. Low ambient lighting bathed the reception area. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waitstaff circulated through the crowd holding silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvre. And right in the center of the room, standing beneath a custom-blown glass chandelier, was David. He was holding a microphone, laughing, soaking in the admiration of 120 guests. Standing directly to his right, holding his arm, was Chloe. She wore a stunning black evening gown, and resting perfectly against her collarbone was a delicate diamond pendant. $3,400, categorized as client appreciation. I walked past the front doors. I didn't make it 15 feet before Eleanor spotted me. She detached herself from a group of older investors and moved with frightening speed to block my path. She wore a silver silk dress, a full glass of champagne in her hand. Her smile never faltered for the room, but when she looked at me, her eyes were absolute ice. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, keeping her voice pitched perfectly so the guests standing 3 feet away couldn't hear. "Good evening, Eleanor. The clinic looks beautiful. You need to leave, Sarah. Right now." She didn't blink. "This is an exclusive event for investors and VIP clients, not disgruntled former employees. I'm still legally married to your son, Eleanor, and my name is still on the original business loan that funded this expansion. I think that qualifies me as an investor." Eleanor took a step closer. The smell of her expensive perfume was suffocating. "David's lawyers sent you the buyout agreement yesterday," she whispered, her tone dripping with venom. "Sign it, take the $50,000, and go quietly. If you make a scene here tonight and embarrass my son, I will make sure you don't get a single dime. You will walk away with nothing." She used money like a leash. She always had. She genuinely believed that because I grew up middle class, the threat of financial ruin would paralyze me. She didn't know that $50,000 was pocket change compared to the $2.4 million federal fine she was currently racking up. "I'm not here to make a scene," I said, stepping around her. "I'm just here for the speeches." I walked to the open bar and ordered a sparkling water with lime. I could feel Eleanor's glare burning into my back. A minute later, David appeared beside me. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look like a man who had just destroyed a 5-year marriage to a woman who had given him everything. He looked annoyed, like I was a parking ticket he had forgotten to pay. "Sarah, this is pathetic," he whispered, leaning his elbow on the bar so anyone watching would think we were having a casual chat. "Chloe is here. My mother is here. The entire board of the State Medical Association is here. Have some dignity and go home." I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the custom Tom Ford suit I had picked up from the tailor. I saw the Rolex I had bought him for our 3rd anniversary after saving for a year. I saw the arrogance of a man who believed the rules of gravity didn't apply to him. "Did you read the insurance files before you signed them this morning, David?" I asked. He blinked, entirely thrown off by the question. "What?" "The files for the laser resurfacing. The phantom patients. Did you read them before you put your medical license number on the bottom line?" His jaw tightened. The polished, charming doctor facade cracked for a fraction of a second, revealing the panic underneath. "I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't have time for your paranoia," he snapped, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "If you aren't out of this building in exactly 2 minutes, I am having security physically remove you from the property." He turned his back on me and walked away. He went straight back to Chloe, putting a proprietary hand on the small of her back as a photographer snapped their picture for the local society magazine. 2 minutes. I didn't leave. I stayed right there at the bar. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. The string quartet finished their song. David stepped up to the small podium set up near the $12,000 champagne fountain. He tapped the microphone. The room fell into a polite, expectant silence. Eleanor stood in the front row, beaming with pride. "Thank you all for coming," David's voice echoed through the pristine clinic. "Tonight isn't just about opening a new building. It's about vision. It's about elevating the standard of care in Arizona. When I started this practice, I promised myself I would never cut corners. I promised I would always operate with the highest level of integrity. I checked my watch. 7:45 p.m. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the lobby, the valet stand was suddenly bathed in a chaotic wash of flashing red and blue lights. Not one car. 6 heavy, unmarked black SUVs and state trooper cruisers swarmed the circular driveway, violently boxing in the Porsches and Mercedes. The heavy crunch of tires on gravel cut right through David's speech. Guests turned their heads, murmuring in confusion, as the heavy doors of the federal vehicles swung open in unison. The trap was closed. The heavy glass doors of the Paradise Valley Clinic did not just open. They were pulled apart by 4 agents wearing tactical vests with OIG and State Medical Board emblazoned in bright yellow lettering across their backs. The chill of the Arizona night swept into the room, cutting through the heavy scent of expensive perfume and catered appetizers. The string quartet froze. The cellist's bow halted mid-stroke, producing a sharp, discordant screech that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. 120 guests, investors, politicians, society friends went completely silent. Dr. David Vance, a lead agent, a tall woman with a clipped, no-nonsense voice, stepped onto the pristine white tile. She wasn't holding a champagne flute. She was holding a thick manila folder. Federal search warrant. Everyone step away from the medical records and the administrative computers. Now. David stood at the podium. His hand was still gripping the microphone. The word integrity was barely 5 seconds old in the air, already rotting. He looked at the agents, his custom Tom Ford suit, suddenly looking like a costume he had outgrown. "Excuse me," David said, his voice amplified by the PA system, sounding thin and reedy. "This is a private event. You have the wrong address." Eleanor moved before the agent could respond. She stepped in front of her son, smoothing her silver silk dress, activating the socialite armor she had worn for 40 years. "Officers, I am Eleanor Vance. There has clearly been a clerical error. My son is one of the most respected surgeons in Scottsdale. If you just let me call the chief of police, he's actually a dear friend, we can clear this up quietly." The agent didn't even look at Eleanor. She looked straight through her. "Ma'am, step aside. We aren't here for a noise complaint." The agent walked directly to the podium and handed David a single sheet of paper bearing the raised gold seal of the Arizona Medical Board. "David Vance, effective immediately, your medical license is suspended, pending a federal investigation into $2.4 million in fraudulent Medicare and private insurance billing." The whisper started at the back of the room and swept forward like a wave. Fraud. $2.4 million. Suspended. The wealthy investors, the men and women who had written massive checks to fund this very clinic, physically took a step back. The crowd parted, retreating to the edges of the room, leaving David and Eleanor standing on an island of their own making. David looked down at the paper. His hands began to shake. Not a nervous tremor. A violent, uncontrollable shaking that rattled the paper against the microphone stand. "This is insane," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically across the legal text. "I don't handle the billing. My wife handles the front office. My wife does the administrative work. Sarah." "Sarah!" He looked out into the crowd, searching for me. He was doing exactly what I knew he would do. The moment the walls caved in, he tried to use me as his human shield. He tried to serve me up to the federal government to save his own skin, just to protect his image for 5 more minutes. I didn't hide. I stepped out from the edge of the bar, walking slowly until I was standing at the edge of the empty circle the investors had formed around him. I met his panicked gaze. I didn't look scared. I looked entirely bored. "Your wife isn't the one under investigation, Dr. Vance," the lead agent said, pulling a second document from her folder. "Your signature is on every single Level 5 authorization form. You personally signed off on 850 phantom patient claims. We have the unredacted digital logs." David froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him a pale, sickly gray. He looked at the agent, then he looked at me. Really looked at me. For 5 years he had seen a receptionist, a quiet girl who organized his calendar, balanced his checkbook, and stayed out of his way. Now, he was finally seeing the certified medical auditor who had spent 4 years at the Department of Health before she ever met him. He saw the exact weapon that had just dismantled his life. "This is a mistake," Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The socialite armor was cracking, piece by piece. "We have money. We can hire lawyers. We'll audit the books ourselves." "You don't have money, Mrs. Vance." A second agent, a man in a dark suit, stepped forward. Pursuant to the federal indictment, a judge signed a comprehensive asset freeze at 4:00 p.m. this afternoon. The operating accounts for this clinic, the primary practice, and your personal trust funds have been locked. You cannot write a check. You cannot retain counsel using stolen funds. The $12,000 champagne fountain bubbled cheerfully in the background, a stark contrast to the absolute devastation happening in front of it. Eleanor's knees gave out. She didn't faint elegantly. She crumpled onto the white tile, her expensive dress pooling around her, gasping for air like a fish thrown onto a dock. She reached a hand up toward the investors, the people she had spent years trying to impress, the people she had treated me like dirt to appease. Not a single one stepped forward to help her. And then came the final, perfect piece of the collapse. Chloe, the 24-year-old aesthetician. The woman David had thrown away our marriage for. Chloe had been standing perfectly still behind the podium, her eyes wide with terror. She wasn't looking at David with love or loyalty. She was looking at a man who was about to go to federal prison, a man whose bank accounts were entirely empty. Chloe reached up to her collarbone. Her fingers fumbled slightly with the clasp of the delicate diamond pendant, the $3,400 necklace. Categorized as client appreciation, she unhooked it. She placed it gently on the edge of the wooden podium, right next to the suspended medical license. She didn't say a word. She just turned around and walked out the back exit, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She didn't look back once. David watched her walk away. Then he looked back at me. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The man who had demanded I leave his clinic in 2 minutes was now standing in a building he no longer owned, with a career he no longer had, surrounded by people who were pretending they had never met him. The agents didn't use dramatic force. They didn't need to. White-collar arrests are usually quiet, administrative affairs. But the sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoing through that pristine, $12 million clinic was the loudest sound I had ever heard. David didn't resist as they pulled his arms behind his back. He just stared at the white tile floor, his shoulders slumped, the custom Tom Ford suit suddenly looking like a cheap rental. The guests didn't stay to watch. The wealthy investors, the politicians, the pharmaceutical reps, they all moved toward the exit in a swift, silent exodus. In less than 3 minutes, the grand opening gala was entirely empty, save for the federal agents, a weeping socialite, a handcuffed surgeon, and me. Eleanor finally found her voice. She scrambled to her feet, her silver silk dress wrinkled and stained with spilled champagne. She ignored the agents and marched directly toward me. Her face was flushed, her makeup streaked, but the entitlement in her eyes burned as bright as ever. "You destroyed this family," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You petty, jealous little girl. You couldn't handle that David was moving on to bigger things, so you burned his entire life to the ground." I didn't step back. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at her with the exact same professional detachment I used when auditing a spreadsheet. I didn't forge the signatures, Eleanor. I didn't bill the phantom patients. I didn't use federal funds to buy diamond necklaces. I kept my voice flat, controlled. I just did the math. "You could have fixed it," she shrieked, the reality of her bankruptcy finally piercing through her delusion. "You know the system. You could have adjusted the coding. You could have protected your husband." "He's not my husband," I said. "He's just a man who thought I was too stupid to read the paperwork he asked me to sign." David raised his head. He looked at me from across the room, flanked by 2 armed agents. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the raw, cornered panic of a man who realized he had just lost his freedom. "Sarah, please," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Please. They're talking about 20 years. You have to tell them I didn't know. Tell them the billing company made a mistake. You're the only one who can explain the files to them." I looked at the man I had spent 5 years of my life supporting. The man whose loans I had co-signed, whose messes I had cleaned up, whose ego I had carefully maintained at the expense of my own self-worth. "I did explain the files to them, David," I said quietly. "In 400 pages, with exhibits." I turned my back on them. I didn't stay to watch the agents lead him to the unmarked SUV. I didn't stay to listen to Eleanor's sobbing echo through the empty lobby. I walked out the side exit, got into my 4-year-old Honda Civic, and drove away. I drove back to our Scottsdale house on autopilot. The roads were empty. Inside, the house was perfectly quiet. I walked into the master bedroom, pulled my suitcases from the closet, and packed. I didn't take the expensive art, the designer furniture, or the jewelry David had bought me to apologize for his late nights. I packed my clothes, my books, and the files from my desk. Just the things I owned before I became the invisible wife. I left my wedding ring on the marble kitchen island, right next to the divorce papers his lawyer had sent me. I didn't sign them. I wouldn't need to. The federal government was about to dissolve our marital assets for me. 6 months have passed since that Friday night at the Paradise Valley Clinic. I live in a quiet apartment in downtown Phoenix now. It's smaller than the Scottsdale house. The countertops are laminate, not marble. But the air is light. Nobody here expects me to fetch their sparkling water or fix their mistakes. I started my own independent medical auditing firm. I have 3 major hospital networks as clients, and my name is on the door. I don't speak to David. He tried calling me twice from the federal holding facility before his trial. I let both calls go to voicemail. He didn't fight the charges. When the federal prosecutors laid out the 400 pages of evidence I had provided, his high-priced defense attorney advised him to take a plea deal. He pled guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of healthcare fraud. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in a federal penitentiary. His medical license was permanently revoked. Eleanor wasn't charged criminally, but the financial ruin was absolute. The state seized the primary clinic, the Paradise Valley expansion, and the Scottsdale house to pay back the $2.4 million in restitution. Eleanor was forced to move out of her gated community. The last I heard, she was renting a 1-bedroom apartment in a part of town she used to roll her windows up to drive through. I don't hate them. I've spent enough time in therapy over the last 6 months to make sure of that. David is flawed. He was terrified of being ordinary. He built an image of a high society surgeon because the real David felt like he wasn't enough. Eleanor built her entire identity around a wealth she didn't actually earn. And somewhere along the way, I became the piece that didn't fit their frame. I became the shock absorber for their insecurities. That's not an excuse for what they did. It's just what happened. I'm telling you this story because maybe you're living a version of it. Maybe you're the one who stays up until 3:00 a.m., balancing the books for a partner who takes all the credit. Maybe you're the one who signs the paperwork, absorbs the condescension, and calls it love because you don't know what else to call it. I did that for a long time. I called it being a supportive wife. I called it being part of a team. And every time I fixed a mistake, or swallowed an insult, or pretended it didn't hurt when they introduced me as the girl who answers the phones, I lost a little piece of myself. A boundary isn't punishment. It's not revenge. A boundary is the moment you say, I'm worth more than this, and then you act like it. The life I have now cost me a marriage, my savings, and 5 years of my youth. Honestly, it was a bargain. If you're the one who always pays emotionally, financially, spiritually for a seat at a table that was never built to respect you, maybe it's time to build your own table. I didn't lose my family that night at the clinic. I found myself, and she was worth the wait. Thank you for staying until the end of this one. It means a lot. I want to ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you have signed the insurance papers to keep the peace, or would you have sent the files? Drop signed or sent in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. If this story touched something real in you, hit like and subscribe. I share stories like this every week about boundaries, about truth, and about finding your voice when the people closest to you try to silence it. I'll see you in the next one.